So I'd like to introduce our moderator for our next panel, The Future of Crop Protection. It is Kevin Chen. He's the CEO of Crop Enhancement. He's been in the materials-centric technology business for 15 years, working for companies not only in AgTech, but renewable energy, semiconductor devices, and telecom networking. He's been with several other companies before in clean energy, including in China and here. And he also currently is a mentor with the MIT Bay Area Venture Mentoring Service. So, Kevin, why don't you go ahead and bring your panel up and we'll get started. Thanks.
Yes, you do.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Roger, and we just want to thank the organizers for letting this panel together. I'm really excited to cover this topic with this esteemed group of gentlemen here with me. It's the future of crop protection. And before we get started with this topic, I'd like everyone to get to know our panelists a little bit. We've got representation from the investment community. We've got representation from the agrochemical community as well, channel partnerships, distribution, as well as actual growers. So let me just go from my right along the panel, and if you could just give a quick introduction of yourself, your company. A couple minutes would be great.
Sure. Mike Wilbur with Wilbur-Ellis. A bit about myself. I live 20 miles north of here. Wilbur-Ellis based in San Francisco. We are the third largest agricultural distributor in the country, fertilizer, chemicals, and seed. About 170 locations across the U.S., 26 states. Primarily retail, although we do maybe 10% of our business is wholesale market. Myself, I'm in charge of our business development business and our Cavallo Ventures. In a previous role, I ran our seed business for a number of years. We sell a lot of corn, soybean, seeds, canola, and the other things. And I also developed our software platform that we use for compliance, regulatory compliance, sustainability reporting, and fertility recommendations and rec writing. So, Ron?
Ron Meeusen. I'm a plant physiologist by training, spent 25 years running R&D in large food and ag companies. Almost the whole time I was kind of the guy when a new technology would come up and people would look at it and say, what do we do with this? You know, they'd say, give it to Ron. You know, so that was my career. And then 12 years ago, I was running ag biotech for R&D for Dow Chemical and stumbled over the fact that at the time there were 750 private venture funds in North America. Couldn't find a single one that specialized in food and agriculture, and thought, hey, you know, looks like the investment world may have missed a gap or missed an opportunity here. So I left Dow to raise a fund, to the normal chorus of you're crazy, you can't do that, there's no way it'll work. But we did raise a small $35 million fund in late 2008 as the markets were burning around us. No one's ever accused me of perfect timing. And now we're on our third fund, and we've got raised about $250 million, made 22 investments, and we invest in early stage food and ag tech startups exclusively. We operate out of Chicago.
My name is Glen Johnson. I've been in the ag chem industry my entire life. I would say that I started with Ciba-Geigy way back in the late 70s, which doesn't exist anymore today. And then I went to work for American Cyanamid for a number of years in R&D, and they don't exist anymore today. And I went to work for ICI Americas, and they don't exist anymore today. But in reality, the Ciba got bought by Novartis and ICI.
I'm not going to sit close to you, right?
I know, but I got good news for you. So Novartis was the old Ciba-Geigy, and ICI became Zeneca, and those two companies merged back in the year 2000 and formed Syngenta. So it's the largest crop protection company in the world, based out of Basel, Switzerland. I sold a business off to a small crop protection company, AgChem. So I am in the pesticide business, crop protection products. The company I joined was NonChemical Corporation, based in Newport Beach, California, which is a very unlikely place for a pesticide company to be based. We had a manufacturing facility in the city of Los Angeles, inside the city limits, the only company that has one of those. Because of that, I bought a chemical plant from DuPont in Mobile, Alabama, another chemical plant from BASF in Missouri, another one from Bayer in Idaho. So that was to mitigate our risk. And a number of years ago, I left AMVAC. We were a relatively small player. You know, the big ones were Dow, DuPont, Bayer, BASF, companies like that. I went to work for AMVAC. We were quite small at that time, market cap of $10 million, sales of $60 million. We had 4 or 5 products. Over the next 17 years, I acquired more than 30 different businesses from Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, Bayer, BASF. We got a market cap over $1 billion within 6 or 7 years. And so one of the fastest growing crop protection companies in the world, 2 years back to back. And so I left them to go run a company on the East Coast in Columbia, Maryland, called Kocide. It was a DuPont business that Mitsui and Company, which is a large trading company out of Tokyo, acquired them in 2014. I was the president and CEO of Kocide for the last 3 years. So I guess I could say, I'll borrow a Clinton phrase, you know, I feel your pain if you're a startup. We bought this business, we were a startup, we were ordering business cards, laptops, cell phones, getting office space, all the things that a startup company has to do. Where I didn't feel your pain is we had instant sales in 35, 37 companies because their product had been in the market for 40 years. And we were owned by Mitsui. They have been around for 3.5 centuries. So we kind of went from new company, mature product, and an old parent. And I've returned back to Orange County just a few months ago, and I've got my own consulting business based in Southern California for M&A activity, strategies, product positioning, things like that.
So my name is Danny Royer. I'm the Vice President of Technology for Bolles Farming Company. Bolles is located in Los Banos, about an hour and a half due east of here. We're a very old farm, been around in California for about 160 years now, have a deep history in kind of innovation, and then also some of our predecessors helped establish some of the senior water rights that we get to enjoy today on our farm, and a lot of others in the Central Valley are enjoying. My job as the VP of Tech on the farm is to seek out and integrate technologies that add value. So from a crop protection standpoint, I do spend quite a bit of time looking at what's coming, where our pinch points are, and what direction our farm should be going in, and where we should actually be investing time trying to integrate things versus just trialing things.
Thank you guys so much. As you guys can see, there's a lot of topics and a lot of experience represented here on the panel. And, we could talk about, sustainable crop protection, organic crop protection. We can talk about biologicals, synthetics. There's a whole wide variety of topics. So I just want to make sure we get to all the topics we have in mind. So if you guys could just say, what topic do you want to make sure we cover on this panel today? We'll just go real quick down the road.
Sure, I'd say technology adoption on the farm. Okay.
Ron?
And I think I'd like to talk a little bit about technology acceptance by society.
Glenn?
All right, so mine kind of relates to both of those, and that's the CRISPR technology, which I think can have a huge impact on our industry if it can be represented maybe differently than the way GMO was, and this is not going to be just GMO 2.0, but maybe something different that the consumer will be willing to accept. So it is new technology, both from an investor point of view as well as distribution and growers.
Okay, Danny?
Data as it relates to compliance, traceability, and operational workflows.
Okay, good topics. Does anybody out there have any topics that you guys want to make sure you hear about. Just shout them out. Blockchain, okay. We'll see if we can fit that into crop protection somehow, maybe. Yeah. Impact to humans, okay. Right, okay.
Less expensive fertilizer.
Fertilizer, all right. One more?
There hasn't been a new herbicide mechanism of action in almost 30 years.
Okay. New modes of action. Okay, great topics. We'll see if we can fit all that in.
Let's start with that one.
You want to start with that one?
Yeah, that's a great topic. I mean, I think that's something we see at Wilbur-Ellis. The innovation used to come from all the chemical companies, and you listed how many dead. I worked for AMSI at one point too, but we really haven't seen a new herbicide mode of action, and we don't see anything on the horizon. And so that's why we're looking. That's one of the reasons we started Cavallo Ventures. We're excited about the other technologies that are coming, but a lot of it's, I don't know, Ron, what you think, but the cost of getting the product through the EPA is enormous. And now you're seeing a lot of these new technologies, the see and spray technologies are going to reduce the amount that are going to be used. So if it's $400 million to get a product through the EPA and they're going to go with see and spray technology, that's going to be a tough sell. So I don't know.
Actually, yeah, Ron, if you want to talk about some things you're seeing in the pipeline.
When I left, now this was 12 years ago, I left the crop protection industry, but there were only, at the time, about 6 crops that could justify bringing a new, if you had already discovered a new herbicide, and it was, you knew it was safe and efficacious, there were only like 6 or 7 crops that could justify it. All the other crops get hand-me-downs from those. The chemists, herbicide chemists, refer to them as orphan crops. You know, little crops, you know, like sugar beets and sugar cane and, you know, cassava and things that about 2/3 of the world is fed on are literally, the regulatory barriers are so high we cannot afford to bring an improved herbicide to them. We've regulated ourselves out of that business. So what do? Well, you can try to change the regulatory paradigm. Good luck with that. People equate that with protection of human health and protection of the environment. It's a sacred cow. You essentially can't even suggest tinkering with regulations without being accused of trying to gut legitimate regulations. So that's not a viable approach, especially not in this bitter political climate. So what does one do? Well, you know, one tries to, number one, reduce the amount of, get the same weed control with less herbicide. And that's where see and spray, you know, if you can use imagery and sensors that can detect weeds and you can direct the spray directly onto the weed instead of spraying the whole field, that's one approach. If you think about it, most of our weed control and insect control and disease control has always been predicated, although we don't talk about it, think of it this way, been predicated on we're going to spray 100% of the field and we're going to ask the chemical to pick out the good guys from the bad guys, kill the insects and not the weed, or not the crop, or kill the weeds and not the crop. But we're going to spray the whole field and then look for selective chemicals. There's no reason we can't, today with robotics and sensors and automation, cannot replace that with robots that roam the field with sensors that identify this as a lamb's quarter plant, kill it, and those next 3 green things as corn plants, and we'll leave those alone and move down, and we could cut the amount of chemical by 100%, or sorry, I've seen figures 90 to 98% reduction is possible that way. So I think you know, we're going to have to bring new technologies in because basically we've regulated the chemical technology to a standstill, as you just said.
There's a couple of really great things that have emerged just here, the spontaneous discussion. One is, you know, the regulatory environment for new technologies. And here we are sitting in Silicon Valley, which is all about innovation. So how does a startup company kind of, you know, align with that type of regulatory regime? That's one thing that's here. The other thing is with the new technology, which you mentioned, for example, see and spray, how does a grower, or how does that get adopted? Because there's comments about fast adoption, slow adoption, and without going too broadly into other fields, again, with crop protection, how do growers think about crop protection and new technologies that come down the pipe? Maybe, Danny, you could comment a little bit about what you guys see at Bowles.
So see and spray or see and weed, we've had, I think that it's stagnated right now, at least from my perspective, where I've had a couple different companies approach us like, hey, we want to come to the farm and try this, and then a month or two later down the road, you're like, hey, are you coming? Oh, well, we're not really ready. So from my perspective, it's definitely not farm ready yet, but the potential for it to reduce herbicides, I mean, it's logical, it makes sense, and if you can get the computing technology cheap enough and fast enough to make it work, there's no reason we shouldn't be adopting it, especially if you can just put it on the back of your tractor and behave the way you've always behaved. So I think that's one of the things with see and spray, you know, this, like something like Blue River, where it's just an implement. And yes, there's a lot of development that still needs to happen, but I, as a farmer, don't need to do a whole lot more. I just need to plug it into my tractor and kind of do what I've always done.
Glenn?
Yeah, so just maybe a comment on that. At one of my prior companies, we were developing a granular application system to apply granular products, and those could be insecticides, they could be biological products, they could be fertilizer, and this has been out in the market now. It was patented a number of years ago. It was the first ever electronic meter. If you think about when you put fertilizer on your lawn and you've got a little whirlybird spreader, well, that's how we apply fertilizers in farms today. But this technology used electronic meters and a computer to control the application. And you go from plus or minus 20 or 25% accuracy with mechanical systems to less than 0.5% accuracy with this electronic computer-driven system. That is now being advanced to where it's not the weed, see and spray technology for a liquid, but for granular products, there's an electronic eye that sees the seed. So if you're planting a crop and you only need to put your product, whether it's a biological product or a soil insecticide, it only puts it where that seed is around that seed. So if you imagine you got one seed here and you got another seed over here, you don't need chemical in between. You just need it around that seed to protect it during that germination phase. And that technology is being developed right now today. Simplot is one of the companies that's field testing it. EPA is very excited about it because if you've got a really expensive product that fits strawberries here in California, but you want to get on 90 million acres of soybeans or corn, and you say, I can't possibly afford, growers can't pay that cost for that. Well, if you're only putting it on in a very small, if you're putting it on in 10% and not 100%, then you may be able to take what was a very expensive product and use it on a commodity crop.
So related to that is, here we're talking about sort of different technical approaches to crop protection, whether it be through machinery or through chemistry. And we've spent a little bit of time right now talking about machinery. I'd be curious to hear what the panel thinks about chemistry-based innovations. Yes, we have regulatory issues that need to be worked out, but what are some of the interesting chemistry or biological trends that we're seeing here as a panel? Maybe Mike?
Well, I guess in terms of adoption, I don't know if it's innovation, but the launch or relaunch of dicamba across the country was phenomenal. I mean, talk about a technology being adopted. There was a need out there to take care of the resistant weeds, and I don't know how many tens of millions of acres got sprayed and then created some havoc with it, but that's certainly one that comes to mind for me.
Yep. Any comments about biologicals or other chemistries?
Well, maybe two. Steve, to your question, in the ag chem industry, from day of discovery to first year of sales, it's averaging 11 years. CropLife has their own statistics. It's about $250 million for every new product that's brought to the marketplace in our industry. So, you're getting into the area of pharmaceutical sort of costs. And that's one reason why we're not seeing new products coming onto the marketplace. If you got a biological, it doesn't matter whether it's for disease control, for controlling fungi, or if it's for insects or weeds. If you make a claim that it controls a pest, you're going through EPA. EPA has gone from 900 reviewers over the last few years down to less than 500, and it sounds like it's going to go down even lower. The PREA process, which you'll have to go through, which is a system that the industry agreed to pay a fee to EPA to review their packages. We can throw that out the window. If you don't have the reviewers there to review these things, you're not going to see new products. But those are some of the hurdles that you're going to face if you're a startup and you've got a product and you're going to make a claim other than a fertilizer claim that you control a pest. You'll have to go through EPA, and it's going to become a more and more difficult process.
So related to that, and it can sound very scary for folks in the room who may be thinking about innovations. Myself, the company that I'm at is in the crop protection business. What about international opportunities? We've talked a lot about the U.S. and the EPA being the regulatory body here. Any comments or thoughts about trends outside of the U.S.? Challenging question.
We don't do much outside of the U.S. in crop protection, but we do see a rapid adoption of technology in Brazil coming, probably because it's less regulatory hurdles. It happens there first before we see it here in many cases.
I'd like to follow up. This isn't exactly on your question, but I think it's important. Currently, the gestalt within our society is, I don't want chemicals, I want natural, I want biologicals. Why? Well, going back to Rachel Carson's book in 1961, Silent Spring, we were all told pesticides are bad. And the pesticides in use in 1961 were 2 orders of magnitude, 3 orders of magnitude more toxic than anything today. At least, 100 to 1,000 times. So, but the persistent belief is pesticides are really, really bad. Okay, don't bore me with the details of an LD50. They're bad. It's a pesticide. We don't like it. And we've also been told natural is good and natural is safe. Mother Nature loves us. Of course, Mother Nature gave us curare and strychnine and hemlock. And by the way, cancer comes from the oxidation of the air we breathe of different molecules in our bodies. And Mother Nature gives us ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And we can go on and on and on. But the point here I want to get to is really quite serious. This gestalt is going to run up against reality. Natural biological molecules evolve. They're not invented by man. We invent a molecule, we go and do safety testing on it before we can take it to market. We test it for carcinogenicity and mutagenicity and persistence in the environment and toxic breakdown products. And we do all that. In evolution, a natural product came from evolution, where some plant was being attacked by some disease organism or some insect, and the survivors actually produced more of some toxic metabolite that protected them. And Mother Nature never does toxicology testing. Mother Nature doesn't care about residues. Evolution does not select for things that are safe for humans. And at some point, it's going to begin to become clear that natural chemicals are no safer and arguably, as a class, much less safe than synthetics. So we've got this gestalt that's pushing our society to go comfortably toward it's natural, it's biological. And the scientists involved in toxicology will look at you and say there's absolutely no reason to believe it.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. As a grower that grows conventional and organics, I think you've just highlighted something that's really important to understand about organics. Organics are not pesticide-free. You're just deriving that chemical differently and putting a label on it, and it's usually less concentrated. And I will tell you from a sustainability standpoint, when I have to go make an application 10 times versus 2 times, that's not sustainable, but I can label it organic, and consumers will pay more for it because of that. It's a very, very false idea that your organic produce, your organic crops, aren't having things applied to them. In fact, they're probably having things applied more frequently than your conventional crops. So I thank you for bringing that up, because it's something that for us as growers, we're striving to be more sustainable. But I know every time I put a tractor through the field to make an application or have the helicopter or airplane, there's emissions, there's greenhouse gas footprints that are involved with that, there's man hours that are involved with that.
Soil compaction.
There's a number of things every time we have to do something in organics that we wouldn't have to do with a conventional product that make the conventional, from a more global perspective, more sustainable. So organics and sustainability from a grower's perspective don't necessarily line up perfectly, and it's a very healthy conversation for us to have.
So, you know, it's interesting for us as a distributor, you know, we're probably the largest distributor to the organic market. I don't know if we have a good way to measure that, but I would suppose most of them get products from us. Our demand on the biologicals has skyrocketed, you know, the last 10 years. And I remember when I was running our seed business years ago, I was giving a talk in North Dakota, and I got feedback after the talk that I wasn't allowed to talk about sustainable farming. That would make the North Dakota farmers mad. And that was the feedback. Now we go up there, and our guys in North Dakota, they're hiring people who focus solely on organics, and the world's changing. Right? And so we look at biological products all the time, and it gets back to what Glenn was saying. If they make a claim, they better have the science there to back it up, and it's hard to distinguish them in the markets. You know, there's so many of them, because it's cheaper to get the biologicals to the market, and then they can't make a claim. It gets very hard to distinguish them in the grower meetings, and guys like Danny sit there, and you see 10 of them, and you can't tell them apart, right?
There's definitely a very intricate set of constraints, regulatory, chemistry, you know, sustainability. There's all these things that companies have to optimize for. So I wanted to come back a little bit to what, Ron, you were just mentioning about kind of the societal move towards wanting sustainable or, you know, natural ingredients. How do companies in crop protection, or how do growers that have to use crop protection products, how are they going to address this move towards something sustainable? How's that going to happen? Because that's a big trend that's going on right now. So
I can say with absolute confidence, I don't know. Okay.
We're all figuring it out.
However, you know, I expect that we will find the belief that natural products are safe challenged in the next 10 years, as inevitably there will be cases where somebody gets sick from something that we thought was natural, and, you know, and there'll probably be a 60 minutes expose at some point that says, you know, what you thought was really safe isn't all that safe. It's more nuanced situations, more complex. So we can look forward to confusion, okay, during a period of time. The other thing I can offer is that we're likely to see a lot more exploration of really different approaches. So for physical approaches it's just beginning, but we're beginning to see in the deal flow coming across our desk, people who aren't using chemicals and they aren't chasing biologicals. What they're doing is looking for physical ways to stop insects. You know, Kevin, your company has a coating you can spray onto plants, and the insects land and they don't recognize it because it doesn't have the typical surface feel, so they don't lay their eggs and they go off, and you're basically hiding the fruit from the insects.
Thank you for the advertisement, by the way. Unsolicited, thank you.
Yeah. Well, you know, but there are other physical approaches. I mean, believe it or not, we've gotten a business model that they're developing poles you can put around a field, and they listen for the frequency of the wing beat of the particular insect pests, and then they zap them with a laser when they're coming into your field. Mosquitoes, larvae, they regulate their buoyancy by keeping a bubble in their gut that they can expand or shrink. There's a company out there that figured out that with a certain frequency of sonic wave in the water, you can cavitate that bubble and rupture their gut and kill mosquito larvae. So they've got this little thing that looks like a mine detector, and you stick it in the water and turn it on for 10 seconds, and all the mosquito larvae are dead. You know, there are there are non-chemical, non-biological approaches that are being explored, and they're likely to be made even more feasible when you combine them with robotics and automated units that are self-guided and sensors that can detect the insects. There's one company that was looking at, I didn't realize this, but insect mandibles, like teeth, are very hard. When they're chewing, they actually have a unique frequency of sound. And there's a company that's building sensors that listen for the chewing bugs, and they can tell what bug is chewing by the frequency of the sound, and then tell you when to go in. So there are a lot of things being developed by a lot of very smart people that are non-chemical, non-biological.
Great examples. Thank you, Ron. Glenn, you had something to?
Yeah, just picking up on what Mike said, if you're the largest supplier of biological products and biopesticides to the industry, and I believe you are. Distributor, yeah. If you're a startup company and you've got a biopesticide or a biological or natural product, that field is growing 15, 16, 17% compound annual growth rate, has for a number of years, and is not looking to to slow down anytime soon. And you can get expedited reviews with the agencies, whether here in the USA with EPA or in Brazil or in Europe or even in places as far away as China. And so if you've got something that fits those markets, there's some huge opportunities for you.
Danny, were you going to say something? Okay. Well, we could go on, and this is really interesting to me personally as well, but I want to pivot a little bit. When we think about new technologies, whether it's biologicals, as you were mentioning, Mike, or maybe some of the robotics, what should companies be thinking about in terms of the adoption rate? Because crop protection as an industry is probably about $100 billion as an entire industry, and it's been around for a long time, and it continues to grow. It's not going to go away. But how do new technologies get inserted into the usage at the grower level? What kind of things do new technologies have to prove before they get adopted, or before you can actually enter the door of a grower and talk about it? Maybe Mike?
So maybe I'll speak about this in two ways. In the broad row crops, what I've seen, and it's the adoption on new things, unless it's very, very effective, like GMO or the dicamba example, typically the channel, which distributors like us are going to want to see data for about 3 years of field trials. And they're going to want to, and then that's going to be for the channel and to get their support. And they will dig into the data, and it'll have to be good, and they will question it and go through it. What I've seen at the growers level is they're going to want to see that data, but it's got to be about within a 3-county area of where they're farming. They're going to say, oh, that's great, that's from Nebraska, I'm in Iowa, I don't really care, can you show me in about 3 counties? And so if they can get there, then it's believable, and then they go. The specialty crop area, back where Danny's farming, I've seen, you're dealing with a different type of farmer generally. I've seen the technology adopted much, much faster. You're dealing with corporations, you're dealing with large farms like Bolles Farming, and who have a guy who's head of technology. Not every farm in America has a technology guy on its staff, and so it's a different kind of animal there. So there is, I believe, a different adoption in apples and wine grapes and almonds than there is in traditional corn and soybeans.
I think Mike hit on a really important piece, and it's something that we do and we actually require when we try something new on the farm, is the data component. And because we're specialty crops, we do have a little bit more higher value in what we're growing. So we'll say, yeah, come put in a 20-acre trial or a 50-acre trial. What's really important about that, as soon as you get the door open, you better make sure you're on top of the data and not counting on the grower to do it. Before I started at Bolles, we had a couple different companies that kept doing trials, and then when I took over doing the trials, I said, okay, well, show me what you got. They didn't have any data. So they didn't have anything, even though they'd done trials on the farm for the last 3 years, they didn't have a data set that actually validated that, hey, this is working. So if you do get your foot in the door on a farm and you get to the point where you're doing a trial, I would highly, highly encourage you to not rely on the grower at this point to capture the data, especially when it comes to yield results. You won't get it. We're busy.
Can I just add one more? So coming from the basic supplier, manufacturer perspective, Mike was our customer. here in the USA. And so as a basic supplier, and it'll depend on your go-to-market strategy, on how you want to get your product into the hands of who your customer is. So as a basic, our customer is right here. It's Wilbur-Ellis as a distributor, and it's his role to take that product to his growers. And so as a basic supplier, if you go around the channel of distribution straight to that grower and try to establish that relationship, and earlier today we had talks from growers on relationships that they have, you can really alienate yourself, and you may never get you back on solid footing. And so I don't know how Mike and Danny want to respond, to that issue, but I would caution you to think through your go-to-market strategy. A couple of the biggest players in the world have tried to go around distribution, and they were taught a very valuable lesson, but because they were billions and billions and billions of dollars in sales, they recovered. But you need to think about how you're going to get to your customer and who that customer really is.
Excellent point. Anything to add? Any other?
Yeah, one of my partners in our fund is Bob Shapiro, has a tendency to come up with simple statements that are really profound. And one of the ones that he's fond of saying is, the status quo is there for a reason. And as you go out to disrupt the status quo, start with a healthy respect for there are likely powerful factors that are keeping it the way it is. And you need to understand them, because if you're trying to change it and they're trying to maintain it, then those factors are going to be fighting you. And it's very easy to look at a chain, one piece of a chain from outside, and say, I could do that better. But what I've seen time and time again is, even if it's not enough to be able to say, I can do that step of the supply chain better, because maybe I can do it 10 or 20 or 30% better, but all the customers who feed that and all the suppliers downstream who are supplied by that have already adjusted all of their actions for that current solution. And I not only have to be better, I have to be so much better that it's worth all these people up and down the chain to change what they're doing to allow my solution to be brought in. And I learned that the hard way. I mean, that was running into a brick wall 3 or 4 times that I didn't even know was there. So, go at these with a very healthy respect for, and an assumption that the solution currently used in the market that you're trying to disrupt, you want to assume it's not only there for good reasons, but the rest of the chain is already adapted to it, and you're not just looking to move them out. It's not a
excellent point. Let me throw this out to be a little bit provocative, and forgive me for doing so, but on this very topic, we're talking about the existing sort of supply chain and the existing status quo, as you mentioned, rightly so, Ron. What would be the panel's thought about some of the new platforms that we might be seeing in the crop protection area? New platforms to sell product, whether it be an Amazon-like process where we can go straight to the grower, or some other related process. Any comments on how those models may or may not fit certain markets? And this could be from the grower perspective, from the manufacturer perspective, from the distributor, any perspective.
So, it's a great topic. We're spending a lot of time on that, and I think we saw Nutrien just announced their digital platform. We're certainly spending a lot of time looking at it. I think we uncovered 9 different e-commerce marketplaces or platforms when we started looking in the last month, and they've been around forever. I mean, the most famous one was rooster.com, which had all kinds of industry support, Cargill, DuPont, and I may get some of the names wrong, but that went up in the .com era. But we do realize they're better now, and people are used to using price lines and things like that, and there will be an unbundling of what the channel does on their service from the price on certain products, on certain products and certain crops will probably go first, where there's less service, but there will be more unbundling of that in the price and more price transparency. So we see it coming, and we're looking at it very hard.
One thing I'm having trouble factoring in is, I see this coming too. What I don't understand is growers have a bond of trust with their suppliers. Oftentimes the suppliers are giving them agronomic advice and other things. And it's been, long-term, sometimes multi-generational. And I don't know how the online systems are going to get over that hump. And I would guess the successful ones are going to have to find a way to work with the trusted advisors, but that's a big factor, a big wild card, I would say. Right?
I think the adoption of those types of systems is going to be very dependent on the type of grower. The logistics of these distributions and getting things to the farm and ready to use is a lot more complicated. It's not clicking a button on a website and all of a sudden it arrives by UPS. We're in a position, because we're a larger farm and we have neighbors that we work with, we can store things, we can create an inventory, we can play a little bit of that value add that the distributors play right now. But I can tell you, because we've dabbed our toes in it, the logistics of it are not fun. And we quickly recognize the value that the distributors play in the chain. So I think there's going to be a lot of learning curve for everybody involved, but at the other side of that is that I think that there's a lot of room for value to be gained by growers in capturing some of that input side. I don't think anything that's out there today is the 100% the solution that's going to be there in 10 years. But the logistical component is where I see the big gap right now, in that, great, you can have something bulk delivered to you, but you need to take it on this day if you want to have the savings, and you need to be able to store it. And those are things that I think that as a grower, yeah, it's great that maybe I can go save 5–10% on something, but I am going to have to take a cost that was added value by that distributor at another point in time. So I think that we have a lot of learning to do in that space, and I think most of the learning is going to actually be in the logistics of moving things and getting them exactly where they're supposed to go.
Let me make sure we get to some of the, and thank you, great discussion. Let me make sure I get to a topic that, Glenn, you mentioned CRISPR. So I was curious about the role that CRISPR may play in crop protection, and new sort of gene editing technologies, how they might fit into the crop protection scheme. One of the things that I'll throw out is obviously the ability to tailor traits that may be resistant to certain insects or disease, and how that would impact, chemical sales. Any other comments from the panel about the role of CRISPR as a function in this technology?
I'll just say it's a very broadly useful tool, but that can create great value and add to sustainability, and its future depends almost entirely on how it's publicly perceived.
Agreed. If it's publicly perceived well, I think it'll probably be bigger than GMO.
Yeah, I think there's some regulatory hurdles. In fact, we heard of some just before the lunch break in the earlier session where we talked about CRISPR. So there'll be some regulatory channels or challenges that have to get sorted out. But if the consumer can drive it, that'll make a big difference. I guess just a few days ago, in April, EPA and USDA have kind of changed their view. They're actually on hold right now as to which way they want to go. And it also depends on just exactly what you're doing with that CRISPR. Are you just clipping out some defective genes, or are you inserting healthier genes in that same spot from the same germplasm? So I think there's a regulatory hurdle that will have to be overcome, but yeah, you're right. I think the consumer can drive that, and it has a tremendous amount of opportunity, I believe.
Well, I think we've covered everything that the panel wanted to talk about in some of the topics here. Does anybody have a couple, we have probably time for maybe 1 or 2 questions real quick? If there's microphones, so I see a hand right here, and then one over there. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Thanks, guys.
He's younger.
Go ahead, please.
Modifying food, okay, in its growing process. I think one of my, as a consumer, I think one of the concerns that comes up, and it's just word of mouth, so ignorance is abounding here, is what does it do to things like bees? Okay, so pollination is one of those great big deals. If we don't have pollination, we all die 3 days later. So, you know, when you're talking about a CRISPR situation, do you take pollination into consideration?
I can answer that. Bee safety is part of the regulatory process through the EPA. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Roger?
The question was, anything we do, if I may rephrase Roger, Roger's pointing out that anything we do to control any population, weeds, insects, diseases, you put the pressure on and evolution hasn't gone away, and so they eventually evolve resistance, and then we're back to needing a new tool. And the question was, he didn't hear any sense of urgency from us, given that weeds and diseases and everything from bananas to coffee are you know, oranges, all kinds of things are under threat from resistant insects and resistant diseases. And shouldn't there be a sense of urgency? God, yes!
How much are you going to do about it?
I'm going to invest $250 million into startups, Roger.
There we go.
What are you going to do?
All right. On that note, thank you guys very much. Thank you.